There we are. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes.
Oh,
How are
good.
you?
It works. I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
I have to tell you, I need to run after the introduction. I've had something come up, and if it weren't for Zoom, I wouldn't be here at all. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
so,
Everything's
so-
okay though, right?
everything's fine. It's just one of these things that, life
Yeah,
is.
sure.
So,
Uh,
how are you?
I'm
I have a book.
good.
I have a
I'm
book.
very excited for this talk.
I am too. I wish I
It's
could.
gonna be
Oh,
fun.
I'm reading it though. So I found this huge, my granddaughter told me about this used book website. So naturally I had to order a few, but I ordered this book. I don't know if you can see it, American Gardens in the 18th Century.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Oh, yes. Well, this is going to be your copy because when I went to put it on my shelf, I realized I had already ordered it a couple of years ago.
Really? Oh, fantastic. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so I will give it to you.
Yeah, thanks.
It's
I was gonna ask you about that. Oh, what was the site that I've been getting all my books on biblio.com
oh, what
lately.
is it? It's like book traders or something.
Oh,
It's
really? Okay.
yeah.
I'll look it up.
I'll look it up the right word thing. But my granddaughter is a thrifter, so she never buys anything for first price.
Oh, yes,
Like
same with books.
everything.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and books are great. And she's in college, so books are an expensive part of her life.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Hi, Eileen, you're muted. Oh, there's Rachel joining in on that.
Hi. Hi,
Okay.
Mary Lou.
Hi, Eileen, how are you?
A little nervous.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
okay.
you're gonna be
You
fine.
know,
It's gonna be
when I
fun.
when I was working, I used to have to do presentations for muckety people in the company. And so they
Yeah.
actually hired a coach. And I went through this coaching session so I would be able to do this.
Yeah.
And they told me two things: always smile, because that enlivens your audience and it puts them on your side.
Do they
And
tell men that?
Yeah.
hmm,
Do they tell men that?
I don't know that it was only women. That's
Uh,
interesting. And you know more about it than anybody else.
that's
So
true.
nobody's going to really know if you know what you're talking about or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and at this point, I feel like I've escaped into nerdism and
Welcome.
I don't yeah, welcome. And here I am, I'm waking up this morning and I actually had to wake up with the alarm. Otherwise, I was really shocked. And I realized, oh no, I have to change things. I absolutely have to go change things. Hi, Lynn. And so out there this morning at 8:30 or 7:30, printing up a whole new wad of paper, a whole new script, and trying to get myself together. I am going to mute myself.
Yep. She said that before she finished what she was saying. Oh, well.
Okay. Uh, Lynn, Susie Buchanan here. Nice to meet you. Did we meet you at the holiday party one time?
I think so, yes.
Okay, all right. Yes, I think I remember that.
Definitely. I'm so sad it's not at the house today. Ugh,
Yeah, well, I think it's probably,
I
you
know.
know, the whole reason we started these talks was it was during the pandemic, I think, and we thought everybody wants to get out into their gardens at this time of year, but the weather's always horrible, right? So you can't really get out into your garden at this time of year. So we decided that we would start this kind of annual spring Zoom lecture that allowed us to all get together and talk about gardening, even though we couldn't actually be out there. And we thought, oh, okay, this year now the pandemic's over, we'll do it live. But here we go, fate intervenes and puts us back into the original.
And in winter.
Yes, yeah,
Technically not.
Well, yeah.
technically, but
I have to apologize because it's my fault.
Oh,
I put my snow shovel away last week.
oh, Oh, Mary Lou.
I did the same.
Oh, so it's both of us.
It's true.
Ruth, welcome. I don't think I've ever met you in person. Susie Buchanan here at the Shirley-Eustis house. I know you're a member.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, I used to teach at the Emerson back in the day.
You did. Oh, how nice.
And we actually had the kid whose dad was sort of caretakering the property. This is,
Mm.
45 years ago. I mean, a long time ago. No.
Oh,
He comes back to, well, some of those folks come back to visit periodically.
Nice.
I'm forgetting the name of the guy who we've seen most recently. Travis, I think. Maybe not the same guy. He's
I
younger.
wouldn't remember.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. Well, you certainly don't look like you were teaching 45 years ago, so good for you.
See, could you make me a co-host so I can?
Yeah, absolutely.
and yeah, can you give me sharing rights, please?
You should
Uh,
have them, Eileen, because you're a co-host now.
Oh, okay.
I didn't
Lynn,
realize
did
you
you
could do
introduce-
more than one co-host at a or more than two co-hosts at a time. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, just so you don't, I'll handle the letting people in side of things.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
I get to
So
just
Lynn is my writing partner and my travel buddy.
So happy to have that opportunity.
Oh, did you
And
go
Lynn
with?
is-
Oh, go,
Yes.
sorry.
He's the week.
We hiked it. We did it all. We did it all. We didn't leave anything on the hills.
Yeah.
It's
Let
great.
me
It
see.
sounds
I
like it
just-
was a great trip.
It was really a good trip.
Yeah, it was truly. It was some ways physically challenging, but it was really, but on the I think we were fine. I think we were like day 2, we're built for going uphill.
Where did you go?
We were in the Yorkshire Dales.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah. Charlotte Bronte country and then the Yorkshire Dales.
Well, I'm a
Isn't
Jane.
that where James Herriot also wrote All Creatures Great and Small? Is that same
Yeah.
territory? Yeah.
There was the Harriet hotels, the Harriet country. There's a lot of Harriet stuff.
And I think it was a really interesting backdrop to Eileen's kind of explaining her talk a little bit to some of us who were interested, a preview of her talk, to have that backdrop to her talk was really great.
Yeah,
I'm
it
sure.
was.
A lot of people were meeting in the hikes, and after we were, it's kind of a subject that came up, and so it was kind of really cool.
Because we were literally walking through farms.
Right. Yeah. And English farms, right? Which of course have such a long imprint on the American farm
Absolutely.
farm
As
activity.
we say.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Susie Buchanan, director of the Shirley-Eustis House. Rachel is here somewhere. She's going to be coordinating our meeting today. And there she is. There's Rachel. Yeah, and we're so glad you can all join us and not have to go out into the rain.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
I see family members. I see friends. I see neighbors. I see siblings.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. Oh, hi, John. There's John. Oh, and I see daughters.
Very
see a
nice.
I see my daughter there. She's not showing her face. think there's a hard and fast rule that if you're in college, you can't show your face before noontime on a Saturday.
Actually, I prefer not to have to do that either.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Looks
Why
like
don't
the
we
wood.
give it, why don't we give it until 2 or 3 after? Is that okay with you, Eileen?
I think that might work. If not. Can you see anything?
Yeah, I know there are a couple of folks who signed up, but whose names I don't see here yet.
Oh, this is great. All sorts of people are joining. This is wonderful. Well, there's at least one professional farmer in our group. Hi, Pat. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Good morning. How is everyone? How is everyone?
Good, good.
Good to see you all.
Good morning, Pat.
There's Bill Finch. Good morning, Bill. And Lori Comlin, another one who doesn't want to be seen before noontime.
She's still getting her cup of tea, that's all.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Saturday, Eileen.
I know. That's what it says. Like nobody wants to be seen before noontime. It's like I woke up this morning and said, oh, remember to put something nice on. All right. Do you think we should get started?
Sure, yeah. Why don't I'll go over a couple tech things and then I'll pass it to Mary Lou. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. For Laura's having soup and thought it more polite to stop the video while she's eating. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for joining us for our spring garden lecture with a very provocative title this morning, The Myth of Roxbury's Gentleman Farmer. So just a couple tech things before we get started. If you could, during the lecture, I think everyone's doing this already, just keep yourself muted just so we can avoid any unexpected sounds popping in. We'll have plenty of time afterward for questions and for discussion. During Eileen's talk, if you would like to, get a question out of your brain, feel free to put it in the chat and we can go through them afterwards. Let's see. Anything else? Susie, am I missing anything?
Did we ask folks to go ahead and sign in on the chat and tell us who they are, and do we want to do that with this lecture?
Oh yeah. If everyone could just sign in with the chat, just put your name and where you're joining us from. If you have an organization you're affiliated with, that'd be great. Just helps us get an idea of who we're reaching and how we can keep doing that. And then I think aside from that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Master Gardener, Mary Lou O'Connor.
Thanks, Rachel. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Mary Lou O'Connor, and along with other members of the Master Gardener team, we have the privilege of playing every summer in the garden at Shirley-Eustis, and I'm looking forward to it opening again shortly, I hope. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce today's speaker, Eileen Woodford. Eileen has a varied and interesting professional career that started as an imagery analyst, a city planner, and an advocate for national parks. She has taught in middle and high school. She's also been a strategic analyst for a construction industry startup, which focused on building affordable housing using low carbon concrete. And Eileen, that sounds like a presentation all on its own, so we'll save that one for later. Her professional accomplishments include securing approval for a controversial master plan for the Gettysburg battle site that expanded the interpretation of to include human enslavement as the root of the Civil War, and a project to preserve the boundaries of the Shenandoah National Park from destructive congressional legislation. Eileen has a BA from the University of Arizona, a master's in preservation planning from BU, where she focused on preservation. She joined the board of directors of Shirley-Eustis in 2019. She had one term as the secretary and is now on the governance committee and on the ad hoc 4244 Shirley Street committee. She lives in Cambridge. Please join me in welcoming Eileen Woodford. Take it away, Eileen.
Thank you. And good morning. So I am going to start my screen share here. Make sure I get the right thing up here. And I'm assuming everybody can see this, correct? And you are looking at a slide that says the myth of Roxbury's gentleman farmers, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And I'm so glad. On one hand, I miss seeing people in person, but I'm really happy that we can get all sorts of people who wouldn't be able to come to the site to join us this morning. My neighbor, Mrs. Gonson, I'm so happy to see you, and I'm so happy that you could join us. My brother and sister-in-law from New Jersey, my daughter who is at school. So I'm really happy that everyone could join us. Let's see. We have to learn how to use this. All right. I want to begin with our land acknowledgement. The Shirley-Eustis House Association acknowledges that Shirley Place rests upon the unceded ancestral homeland of the Massachusetts people. As an historical organization, we recognize that American Indian, Native American, Indigenous, First Peoples, and First Nations are present and alive today and are not mere relics of history. And we further recognize that their history and future is deeply linked to this land we occupy. We understand and embrace our responsibility to amplify the stories and livelihoods of our region's Indigenous peoples and to work toward dismantling the destructive legacy of colonialism. In addition, I want to dedicate this morning's talk to Roxbury's community gardens. This is community feeding community. Long may they thrive. A long time ago in 1985, while conducting the architectural survey of Southbridge, Massachusetts in southern Worcester County, I came across a surprising farmhouse. It was built around 1850. And what made it surprising is that it was large and it was rather fancy compared to what was there before. The house reflected a new prosperity in the town's farms. And according to the historical maps that I had been looking at, there hadn't been many new farmhouses built in the first decades of the 19th century. And most of what had been built was very small, very plain, and looked more like they belonged to the 18th century rather than to the 19th century. What prompted this new prosperity, as I came to learn, was a revolution in agriculture during the 1830s and 1840s. This revolution was characterized by a transition from subsistence farming to commercial farming achieved through specialization. In the case of Southbridge, that transition was to dairy, fruit, and vegetable farming. Second, improved varieties of crops resulting in more vigorous plants and greater yields, as well as improved livestock breeds. Third were improved farming practices, including crop rotation. That crop rotation didn't come into being in Massachusetts until the 1830s is rather stunning. And fourth, the introduction of new technology and improved farming equipment. In short, the practice and the business of farming was completely transformed, resulting in better quality crops, higher crop yields, and greater dairy production. And of course, for the farmer, greater wealth. The question I'm going to explore today is, how did this transformation come about? What role did the gentleman farmers of Roxbury, men like John Lowell, Henry Dearborn, Enoch Bartlett, and Samuel Walker, play in this transformation and the new prosperity of Massachusetts farms? Our story begins with a bunch of grumpy old men. In this case, the grumpy old men were the Federalists who made up the Boston's political, economic, and social elite. And at the end of the 18th century, in the years following the War for Independence. One of the elite, John Lowell, has a bee in his bonnet. Lowell is one of the wealthiest men in Massachusetts. He's a lawyer who made his fortune representing American maritime merchants and privateers in an admiralty court. His world looks east over the ocean, as that is the source of his fortune. As a member of the elite, he considers himself to be part of the new nation's natural aristocracy, an aristocracy based on education, Harvard, earned wealth, and superior social position that both his education and his wealth give him. He and his small circle of this elite, all men of commerce and trade, also believe that they are due deference in matters of politics by men who are below them in social rank. Their politics is distinctly federalist, anti-tariff, anti-westward expansion, anti-anything that would hinder commerce, especially maritime commerce. During the war, these men wielded tremendous influence and power in national and Massachusetts politics. The problem is, in the post-revolutionary republic, the common man isn't listening to men like Lowell. Jeffersonian sentiments, a desire for equal say in matters political and economic, for protectionist tariffs, and for westward expansion are growing both in the nation and in the state. Frustrated that they are no longer in control of national politics and that their hold on politics in Massachusetts is slipping, men like Lowell retreat to their newly acquired rural estates and take up gentleman farming. In the case of Lowell, he buys a farm in Roxbury, circled in red that you see there, desirous to lead what he considers a corrupt and political world. And for reference point, the Shirley-Eustis House Association, Shirley Place, is located in the blue circle that you see on the map. Oops, sorry. Here, Lowell and his fellow gentleman farmers who purchase estates in Roxbury, Dorchester, Waltham, Brookline, Brighton, take up experimental farming, exalting the benefits of rural life to each other in their vast correspondence, while trading information about the latest writings in scientific agriculture coming out of England. They see England as superior in all things agriculture, adopting English practices and crops without regard to differences in latitude, climate, and soil. Thus, their approach to farming is more theoretical and philosophical rather than practical. While all of these guys profess to love the life rural, not all of them do, and not all of them are good at it. Some of them are actually downright bad. However, some of these gentleman farmers embrace their rural life, building elaborate greenhouses and expanding existing orchards and vegetable beds. They import new fruit varieties and vegetable seeds, primarily from England. Not all is farming. These new retreats include pleasure gardens and picturesque landscapes, as seen here at the Lyman Estate in Waltham, belonging to Theodore Lyman. Of course, our gentlemen are only doing some of the work. This is a weekend and warm weather pursuit for them. All of them have their year-round professional jobs in Boston, and all of them have year-round professional gardeners and farmhands doing the heavy work at their rural estates. The second reason that Lowell has a bee in his bonnet is that farmers, practical yeoman farmers, are leaving Massachusetts, emigrating west to the wilds of upstate New York and the Ohio River Valley. Most, but not all of these farmers are subsistence farmers, farmers who live on what they produce, including clothing, with surplus crops being sold in local markets. By the end of the 18th century, after more than 100 years of cultivation by farmers of European descent using 17th century European farming methods, the soil in Massachusetts is exhausted. In addition, due to the practice of dividing land among sons, farms have become smaller and smaller, while the population seeking land has increased. For subsistence farmers, the farms are too small and the soil too depleted of nutrients to be able to live off the land. The wilderness of upstate New York offered more land for bigger farms, richer soil, and even with outdated farming practices, greater yields. The emigration of farmers is a problem. For both Federalists and Jeffersonians alike, agriculture was seen as both the moral foundation of the Republic and the economic basis of the nation. Thus, there is a mythic status ascribed to the yeoman farmer in the emerging American psyche. He was a symbol of virtue, self-sufficiency, and enterprise. A state without farmers would lose its moral underpinnings. A state without farms would lose its perceived source of wealth. Our gentlemen farmers were losing their political hold over the state. They could ill afford to lose the source of their moral prestige. In 1792, to stop the emigration of farmers, 28 men, all members of Boston's commercial elite and gentlemen farmers, established the Massachusetts Society for Promoting Agriculture, the MSPA. Its mission was to renew agriculture in Massachusetts, to rebuild its source of wealth. They encouraged farmers to take up experimental farming. The MSPA would disseminate the findings of experimental farming through its publications and articles, and by awarding premiums or prizes for achievements in various categories of farming. While laudable in purpose, there are some serious problems with the MSPA. First, the membership was limited to a very small circle of very wealthy men who had founded Boston's other high-tone institutions like the Massachusetts Historical Society, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the Boston Athenaeum. Not only was the price of membership so high that yeoman farmers could not afford to join, what yeoman farmer had the time or the money to engage in experimental farming? Second, yeoman farmers mistrusted MSPA. What did men of commerce know about the realities of farming at the practical level? Third, MSPA members in their speeches and writings tend to excoriate farmers, lecturing them about their bad farming practices, their laziness, and their messy farms. As a consequence, most of the state's farmers ignored the MSPA, and any gains made from experimental farming that its members did generally stayed inside the tight circle of members. The gentlemen farmers of Boston's elite were not the only ones looking to improve farming in the state. At the far western edge of the state in Pittsfield, Elkanah Watson also recognized the problems with agriculture in Massachusetts. A Mayflower descendant, originally from Plymouth, Watson was a wealthy merchant living in Albany. He too had emigrated west. In 1807, at the age of 50, he retired to become a gentleman farmer at a 250-acre farm that he purchased in Pittsfield, Mass, in Berkshire County, 20 miles away from Albany, New York. Watson was a keen observer of the world and for 30 years had kept a detailed journal of his extensive travels, both in English America, later the Republic, and in Europe, primarily England, France, and Holland. It was in Holland that Watson observed that farming was a family enterprise. Women were essential to operations of farms and the business of farming. He was a natural optimist and enthusiast. He was gifted with a silver tongue and seemed to have the ability to convince people to do almost anything. This guy could talk a starving dog off a meat wagon. He also was a well-connected man who kept up with the world, including what was new in agriculture. Well, it doesn't seem he was a member of the MSPA, but he does seem to have known of its work. However, Watson had an entirely different approach to getting farmers to change their ways. Rather than excoriate them, he decided to celebrate them, and he organizes the first county agricultural fair in the US in 1811. In 1809, Watson brings 2 merino sheep into the center of Pittsfield and parks them in the town square. Merinos were new to the US, and this was quite the sight to have these 2 foreign sheep in town. The sheep draw a crowd, and never one to miss an opportunity to engage with the world, Watson starts encouraging farmers and their wives to bring their prize animals, fruits, and vegetables to town to show off. After 2 years of gaining trust, he opens the Berkshire County Fair, beginning with a celebratory parade. There are prizes for animals and plants, as well as items made by the women. There are also exhibitions of new plant varieties, new farming methods, and new tools and machines. He used the fair to educate farmers from a place of local pride. The fair is the inaugural event of the Berkshire Agricultural Society, a group of farmer families, albeit some gentleman farmers, serving farm families. This so-called Berkshire Society model was a popular idea among farmers, and it quickly spread throughout the counties in the state. Essex County, on the far eastern side of the state, held their first fair in 1818, and we continue to have that fair today. The MSPA continued its work during the first quarter of the 19th century, but with little gusto and not much success. The old guard of the elite had long passed on, and along with it, the anti-expansionist zeal that had fueled the organization's establishment. Farmers and some of the descendants of the elite had moved west despite the MSPA's call to stay home. The MSPA's focus turned to keeping farmers on the farms for another reason: to provide perishables for the growing population in the new mill towns. The first wave of industrialization sprang up in the wake of the War of 1812, established and financed by the inner circle of Boston's elite. By the 1820s, Massachusetts was firmly on its way to becoming a manufacturing state. New technology introduced in the 1830s and 1840s helped with this feeding the mill towns, as well as propelling westward expansion even further. The first is the invention of the steel plow by John Deere in 1837 in Moline, Illinois. And here we see a later print of Mr. Deere standing in front of one of his later plows. And in the background, you see his factory in Moline. Up until then, farmers since the time of the ancient Egyptians had been using wooden plows that were so heavy that it took a team of oxen to pull the plow. They also broke and had to be fixed regularly. It was slow, hard work, and limited how much land a single farmer could plow. It also meant that the farmers had to feed and care for 2 very large draft animals that had limited use beyond stump clearing and plowing. Steel plows were lighter than wooden ones and could be drawn by a single horse. They were also stronger, and a farmer could plow more land more quickly with 1 animal rather than 2. While the plow benefited farmers in Massachusetts, it also opened up the prairies west of the Mississippi to farming. The stronger blade could cut through the tough grasslands in a way that was impossible for wooden plows. The prairies were no longer a barrier to westward expansion. The second new technology was the perfection of the steam locomotive and the subsequent construction of railroads. By 1825, the Erie Canal, constructed with the enthusiastic support of Elkanah Watson, was already bringing wheat and flour into Massachusetts at a price and quantity unachievable by Massachusetts farmers. By 1840s, railroads had opened up the heartland, and by 1850, railroads and established overland mail service connected the nation from east to west. Railroads meant that cattle from large farms that could support larger herds could be brought directly to the slaughterhouses in Massachusetts, eliminating the need for farmers in Massachusetts to raise beef cattle. But also by the 1840s, specialization in perishables, dairy, fruit, and vegetables, was beginning to take root in Massachusetts agriculture. Railroads now crisscrossed the state, allowing farmers to transport their products to local and regional markets throughout the state. In 18, oops. Whoa, how come it's not going? There we go. Ah. Huh. That other slide doesn't want to. Let's see if it, oh, okay, stay. In 1805, while relatively a young man, John Lowell Jr. retired from the world and lived full-time at his father's Roxbury estate in Bromley Vale. His interest turned to horticulture, not to promote horticulture as a social good, but primarily for the purposes of gaining personal satisfaction and cultural refinement. He was not alone. A new generation of wealthy men, some the descendants of the original 18th century elite, others newly arrived in their wealth, were taking up the rural life in Roxbury and the surrounding towns. Their concern was not the farmer. Their concern was for themselves, for their own enjoyment. Science remained at the heart of these pursuits, but the outcomes were less gritty. Flowers and ornamental shrubs now held the same attention as fruits and vegetables. These interests came together in a new society, the Mass Horticultural Society, founded in 1829. Roxbury gentleman farmer Henry Dearborn was its first president. Ostensibly formed to advance the science of horticulture, its focus was in actuality on the personal and the ornamental. It was the new club in town, however, and everyone wanted to belong. Despite the focus on the more ornamental, there was real horticultural science taking place at the Mass Horticultural Society. Much of the activity centered on improving existing varieties of fruits, vegetables, and flowers, as well as cultivating new varieties. And we see here some of those new varieties: Downer's Late Cherry, the Boston Pine Strawberry, and Clapp's Favorite Pear, though I think Clapp's Favorite Pear was actually cultivated prior to the start of the Mass Hort Society. While gentleman farmers made advances in plant cultivation, a good deal of this scientific knowledge was brought to the society by a new type of member: the nurserymen. One of the most exceptional aspects of the new Mass Hort Society was who could become a member. High membership fees prevented anyone but the elite from joining the old MSPA. But Mass Hort had a graduated entry fee, allowing men of middle means, especially professional nurserymen, men who propagated, grew, and sold plants for a living, into its ranks. Their presence changed everything. One of these professional nurserymen was Roxbury resident Azel Bowditch. He and the other nurserymen were the bridge between the serious amateur gentleman farmers of the MHS and the commercial market, adding their own considerable horticultural knowledge into the mix. They formed close relationships with gentleman farmers, such as Cambridge's Charles Hovey did with Roxbury gentleman farmer Francis Dana Jr., resulting in a constant exchange of scientific knowledge. One of the most critical things they did was to propagate their own seeds, ending importation of British seeds. Before the Mass Hort Society was started, most of the seeds tended to be English. English seeds for both flowers and vegetables were perceived to be by Americans to be superior to American-raised seeds, and they probably were. However, by the 1840s, Bowditch and others claimed that their seeds achieved better results. Maybe, maybe not, but their message sticks, and the American seed industry is born. Furthermore, not only did he and other nurserymen in the area cultivate, propagate, and sell vegetable seeds, flower seeds, and fruit trees in the Boston area, by the 1830s, they were selling them everywhere in the US. Wherever the railroad and mail could go, their seeds and saplings could go. As the country expanded, so did their markets. That meant California. And you see here, what I find really interesting here is if you look at his seed catalog, you see seeds for West Indies, it wasn't just, they were not just limited to the US, they sent their seeds all the way to the Caribbean. In our popular imagination, we give Johnny Appleseed the credit for spreading apple trees across the West. But it is really the nurserymen who are the true Johnny Appleseeds. They are responsible for spreading the horticultural legacy of the Mass Hort Society across the country via the mail and the railroad. And, you know, after spending the last few months researching this topic, I am convinced that it is the nurserymen who have ensured the long-lasting legacy of the Mass Hort Society. And the effect that they had on commercial scale fruit and vegetable production is really, as well as pleasure gardening, is really profound. And they are profoundly understudied. How are we doing for time? Are we okay? Oh, we're fine. All right. So another one of our gentlemen, our nurseryman is Charles Hovey of Cambridge. He starts the first gardener's magazine in the US, the American Gardener's Magazine and Register. And he starts this in the early 1830s. We see here the cover from 1835. He also publishes the first compendium of fruits in America in 1849. And it's a 2-volume description of the various various varieties, including color plates. And we see here an example of these really gorgeous color plates that he included in his compendium. This man was held in such high regard that Roxbury gentleman farmer Francis Dana Jr. Named a new pear in honor of Charles Hovey. And Hovey and Bowditch are two extraordinary individuals that we know very little about. Oops, it's not going. There we go. One of my favorite gentleman farmers of this era is Samuel Walker. He and his near neighbors, William and Caroline Eustace, as you see circled in green, and of our own Shirley Place, and Enoch Bartlett moved to Roxbury about the same time. Bartlett in 1817, the Eustaces in 1819. His property on Dudley Street, circled in red, included extensive orchards, greenhouses, much like Azelle Bowditch. Walker is unique as he is both a gentleman farmer and a nurseryman. He was a publisher by trade, but he also ran a nursery business on the side, publishing his own seed catalogs, and like Bowditch and Hovey, shipping his seeds and saplings across the continent and to the West Indies. In many ways, Walker comes across a lot like Elkanah Watson, a man of contagious enthusiasm who is both highly regarded and genuinely liked. Now, we can't have a presentation about the gentleman farmers of Roxbury without talking about Enoch Bartlett and the Bartlett pear. Bartlett pears are the most grown pear in the Western Hemisphere, and they make up 60% of all pears grown in the United States. The fruit tastes good, but what's important for large-scale commercial production, especially in the age before refrigeration, is that the tree is hardy compared to other pear trees. The fruit stores well, and it cans exceptionally well. And despite the stunning commercial success of the Bartlett pear, there is nary a word about Enoch Bartlett in the readily available literature. There seems to be a shadow over his reputation. In 1817, Bartlett buys his property in Roxbury from Thomas Brewer, who, as a gentleman farmer himself, had planted an orchard on his property containing a variety of fruits. And we see the location of Bartlett's farm circled in red, and again, our Shirley Place circled in green. Brewer had imported pears from England, one variety of pears from England, somewhere around 1795, where it sold under the name of the Williams pear. As a man of wealth, Bartlett wants to belong to those institutions which indicate that he belongs to the Boston elite. And so he joins the Mass Hort Society in its early days and even becomes an officer. Bartlett is a smart guy. He recognizes his pear, the pear that he found on his property, as a new fruit unknown to the Hort Society. He also recognizes the qualities of the pear. At some point in time, he presents his new pear to the society with the name the Bartlett pear. It's unclear whether he gives any provenance to the pear, but the society accepts the new pear with this nomenclature. All good until it becomes clear that the pear already has a name in England, the Williams. Mass Hort member Robert Manning takes on the task of sorting out the nomenclature of the pear, where it is discovered that it is not even the Williams pear, but a pear cultivated earlier in France as the Bon Chrétien, or the Good Christian. And it's not unusual for people to ascribe a name of a pear or a fruit to themselves in the days before there were fruit patents. So Bartlett is doing what Williams had done before him and others had done before Williams. While the society seemed to accept the pear as the Bartlett, maybe giving Enid Bartlett the hairy eyeball in the meantime, one nurseryman in the society is having none of Bartlett's pear poaching. Charles Hovey of Cambridge, that highly regarded nurseryman, continues to list the pear in his 1849 catalog, nearly 2 decades after the presentation of the pear to the society, as a foreign variety with the name Bon Chrétien. In 1848, the newly formed American Pomological Society, an offshoot of the Mass Hort Society from some of its members, accepts the name Bartlett, ending the question of the pear's name, at least in the US and now in the Western Hemisphere. However, the reputation of Bartlett, the man, doesn't seem to have fared well. While there is an abundance of laudatory comments about other members in the Mass Hort Society, there is nothing about Bartlett. So what role did the gentleman farmers of Roxbury play in bringing about the new prosperity of Massachusetts farms by 1850, the new specialization, focusing on vegetables and fruits? Here's what they did despite their insularity as a closed elite group. Back in 1792, they identified a serious problem with agriculture, the depletion and exhaustion of soil, so that farms were too small. They introduced new breeding stock into Massachusetts, reinvigorating and improving breeds. They strengthened the vigor of existing varieties of fruits and vegetables. They created a market for American cultivated vegetable seeds, ending a long dependency on British seeds. And they introduced new varieties of fruits, the Bartlett pear and the Concord grape, among them, that allowed large-scale commercial fruit growing possible. But this has to be balanced with the establishment of local agricultural societies as a vehicle for real agricultural reform and the introduction of new farming machinery. However, as we are facing the rampant overuse of monocultures today, the overdependence on chemical fertilizers, and the control of food production by national agrochemical and seed monopolies, we should look at this time in this decade, in the early decades of the 19th century, and these men to see what lessons we can learn as we face our challenges in agriculture today. So as we can experience the prosperity enjoyed by the farmers of Southbridge in the mid-19th century. Thank you. How many? So do we have any questions? And you're going to have to unmute yourself if you have a question. No questions. Susie?
Yeah, I have. So, what were the books that you found most useful? I mean, you don't have to list all of them, but a couple books that you found the most useful for sort of educating yourself on this, and where would you suggest scholars go next? I guess that's a 2-part question.
It's really interesting. There was one book that I used as the foundation, and it was called Cultivating Gentlemen. But a lot of the scholarship that I was seeing online through Internet Archive and has been published in the 1970s, 1980s. That's old scholarship. There's not a whole lot of new scholarship around this, which was surprising and not surprising. It's in fact, it was a problem getting some sources. And, you know, I just put the call out there, and some of my friends in Cambridge helped me out with some sources about Charles Hovey. But a lot of it was from Mass history itself, the 1929 history, which you always have to take those with a grain of salt because, you know, they're talking about themselves. They're not going to say anything bad about themselves. But I found that there was a significant lack of recent scholarship around this. Rachel, are you there? Can you go through some of the questions if there are questions? I see some people have
Yep, I'm here. Lynn says Ruth had a question.
No?
Oh, maybe not. Okay. And then Laura B says, I don't necessarily expect you to have the answer, Eileen, but in the age of so much DNA-based research, I wonder if anyone has sequenced the Bartlett pair and identified its true heritage.
What a great question. I don't know the answer to that. However, the Kew Gardens, the oldest botanical gardens in the world, are redoing the what they call the tree of life based on DNA association rather than observable traits. And so I'm sure that we're going to get down to the fruits. We just saw this garden a couple of weeks ago when we were in London, and they are taking an entirely different approach to how they are organizing all the phyla of plants. Let's see. Oh, I see one. Gore Place, Christopher and Rebecca Gore. Yes, they were definitely part of that first generation of post-revolutionary gentleman farmers. And Gore is an interesting guy because on one hand, he's like, oh, I just really want to go to the country. I don't want to work anymore. However, I have, you know, this life I gotta support. I really like my lifestyle. I was in England. I saw how they lived. And gosh, I guess I should go to work. But in the meantime, I'm going to build this really gorgeous estate out in Waltham. Yes, Susie put the name of the book, Cultivating Gentlemen by Tamara Plakins Thornton, 1989. And she just retired. That's how old this scholarship is. There's Shirley Place. Oh, Rick, can you, what's your question? Ms. Rick Detweiler, what's your question about the? I can see you have a comment in here.
In the chat, I just mentioned Danella Pearson's landscape history of the house that has some more on Samuel Walker and Madame Eustace exhibiting at Mass Hort with his help. He was acting kind of as her agent, I think, at some points. But there's a file I have on it that has the shows all the greenhouses on his land and other photos of the house that show he had an enclosed glazed piazza like the Eustace greenhouse, which was at the basement level. So there's more. If you're interested, I can send you the files.
Thank you. Thank you. What's interesting is Madame Eustace, when she moved into the house, had brought with her seeds from England. And as a woman, her husband she was a widow at the time, by the time Mass Hort comes into existence, and she cannot join. So it makes sense that Samuel Walker, her near neighbor, would be her agent in this.
Yeah, I actually had a related question, Eileen. You know, we know, as you just mentioned, Madame Eustace and other women couldn't exhibit directly with Mass Hort, but what role were women playing in this kind of gentleman farmer movement, if any?
They probably were, because we all know that women had to operate behind the scenes. There was almost nothing in the readily available sources that mentioned women, except every so often they'd say, oh, and Mrs. Eustace won, her pear exhibit in 1850s down at the Hyde Park Fair. Again, another blank in the scholarship. There is also zero information about any Black farmers in the readily available literature.
Wow.
Hey, Eileen, did you find any connection with United Fruit Company? You know, that's the predecessor to Chiquita Banana. I've always thought it was so bizarre that, you know, the United Fruit Company started in Boston. I mean, of all places for a banana, you know, trading company. Is there any connection between the work you're doing and why, like, you know, the most premier global fruit trading company happened to be located in Boston at around kind of the same time?
There was nothing I could find, but I suspect because this elite was so focused on mercantile trade, and even when they turned their investments towards manufacturing, they still continued to control the wharves in Boston and the mercantile trade, that I wouldn't be surprised if that's the link there. You know, I always think of the United Fruit Company in the 1950s and all the bad things that happened in Central America. You know, but that's a really interesting connection that I think we need to follow up on.
Amen.
And there's another question from Laura in the chat asking, so you said there, Eileen, that there were there's no evidence of African-American farmers, but Laura
In this
asks, yeah, so Laura asks, during the Great Migration following the Civil War, do we know whether African-Americans were able to find work on area farms and who the laborers were?
we know that there were African-American laborers on farms in the Boston area prior to the Revolution. One of my friends here in Cambridge, her ancestor actually was a slave owner in Medford. And so we know that there were African-American laborers, both enslaved and free, in the area. And at the time that John Lowell is starting this, there is slavery in Massachusetts. It then ends. And there was not just there was a Black population here. There was a free Black population on Beacon Hill and other areas out in Concord. And they were probably engaged in agriculture. It did not show up in my search because I was focusing on this elite, these gentlemen farmers. So that's another area that we just have to look at. Mr. Finch, I think I see your hand there.
You do. I have a problem. I can only talk on one computer. The other one, the bigger computer doesn't have, the microphone doesn't work. I don't know. And I'm getting all sorts of nonsense out of it. Anyway, did you or anybody actually map out where in Roxbury all of these various gentlemen farmers were located, and what remnants do we have of those in terms of buildings, etc.?
You know, I did not. I was, you know, I don't know if that's there. I couldn't find it. And I think what's happened is that the town of Roxbury is different from what we consider to be the neighborhood of Roxbury. And so part of where John Lovell lived is now what we consider Jamaica Plain. And I think what has to happen is a lot of these little historical societies have to get together with their own resources and start sharing this to do that actual mapping, because it is unclear to me where some of these places. Susie and I were looking at these maps, trying to figure out, like kind of guesstimating where they were located. And so if there's any remnants, it's unclear.
I mean, there was a state up on Fort Hill.
Yes.
Some of which still even survives. But the question of where these properties were located and what's left of them relates to, our interpretation of the Shirley-Eustis house in relation to the development of Roxbury.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is one of those things we got to put on the list.
I think I saw Susie's hand first, and then we'll go over to Rick.
Just one observation I had from earlier in the lecture, that Elkanah Watson, goes to Holland, and he's like, gosh, the women work on their farms too. But what I think is interesting about that is this weird blindness there, because of course we know in the pre-industrial era, especially for subsistence farmers, women are out there working in the fields just like men, right? It's an entire family enterprise.
Yeah.
And it's funny that he, you wonder what kind of, I don't know, self-delusions are going on there that he's thinking, because he's a wealthy guy, right? He's thinking these, farm wives are like, sitting at home embroidering little pictures of flowers or something like that. And then he has to go to Holland to actually see women working in farms. I found that kind of interesting. Yeah.
And he was at that point in life, he was I think he was in his 20s, or probably his late 20s, early 30s. So, he was just getting his worldly vision. It really was this aha moment. And it's also where he got the idea of like, oh, canals, they make a difference. And what's interesting is earlier in the MSPA, the Lowell group, they're almost like, oh, yeah, we got to pay attention to women, but it's mostly they saw them as inside domestic staff almost. They didn't see them as an integral part of the operations of the farm. Rick.
Yeah.
But I mentioned one other thing that you won't find in any of the books. The horticultural and garden history starts in the 18th century, of course. But Henry Pelham's map of Boston in 1775, he was Copley's half brother. But to make a long story short, he shows all the garden beds along Tory Row as well as at Shirley Place. The two squares in the back of the house are the garden beds in between and the buildings. But the other critical piece of information that you should know is that there were gardens at Louisburg that were done by the engineer and the engineer's house up there. John Henry Bastide was the chief British engineer who was in Shirley's company in the 1740s, as well as Richard Gridley, who built the redoubt on Bunker Hill. I believe they and the soldiers they reputedly built the terraces at Shirley Place were involved. Both Shirley's wife, Frances, and the engineer's wife, John Henry Bastide, were involved in horticulture in gardens at Louisburg when Shirley visited there in 1745. So there's a huge kind of northerly influx of information as well. And not only that, but Shirley's stable and all the animals in it apparently were sent from the north, according to a letter from Louisburg in 1747 by one of Thomas Hancock's captains. So you can find that. I have it if you're interested, but there's the husbandry as well as the horticulture in the farming in Roxbury that goes back to Shirley and before.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that these gentlemen farmers start this kind of thing. It's just they're consolidated around the MSPA for a very particular reason. And that is because these farmers are leaving Massachusetts. And so ever since, the wealthy have had gardens prior to this, it's this westward emigration and the loss of their moral underpinnings with the emigration of the farmers that becomes the focus of a lot of Lowell's work around agriculture.
Right. And these lots were really quite small for a farm. These were more like urban gardens in these Roxbury estates and Cambridge.
I want to be mindful of our time because we are almost at the noon hour. And I know, Lynn, you put in a source for going to look at comparing map overlays in the Boston area. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. So are there any other questions? Because other than that, what I would like to do is to thank every single one of you for joining us today. And if you haven't been to the Shirley-Eustis House Association to Shirley Place, please come. We are embarking on a brand new, exciting adventure with the purchase of what is the remnants of Governor Shirley's stables at 4244 Shirley Street. And we are planning a new future for the organization and for the site to talk about a broader story, a deeper story, and a better story about all Americans, including the enslaved Africans who lived there at one point in time. So there are no other questions or comments. Susie and Rachel, I'm going to.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question about your research. You talk about readily available sources. Do you like things like who Bartlett was and why he's not mentioned much? Do you think those sources are things that you could find if you had, I don't know, infinite amount of time and cash to go research some archive somewhere? Do you think it's just all lost to history, to time?
I don't know. Good question. That's a good question. I don't know. I suspect that there's a box of something somewhere. There is sort of the Rosetta Stone of some of this information, but it's probably in the back of the Mass Historical Society, in other libraries. It's really unclear about where it is.
I can tell you one gem is in the Mass Archives. It's the 1771 Mass Tax, and it has all the animals and crops and barrels of cider that each estate grew. And you just have to know their name. It's all online.
Yeah. No, those are great resources. Absolutely. Susie.
I think it helps to know too that the large percentage of Mass Hort's own archives are uncatalogued. And so
yes,
to Franklin's question, I think probably there's a lot of it there, and it would just be really a lot of legwork, pulling that material together, right? Actually having to go through boxes of uncatalogued material. I forget who pointed out the Atlas Scope thing, but another way we started, we had a little bit of time, so we did a little bit of research trying to track down some of these farmers, is things like, what do you call it? Wills and probate inventories, and, where you can start to figure out who's giving land to who, all kinds of weird backdoor routes to approaching who's where, especially with respect to Bill Fitch's question about where these estates are located. Because wouldn't it be great to have such a map? You've already started one there in your lecture, circling the estates that you found.
Yeah. And they're some of these men, their actual residence is not in Roxbury. It's in Boston and Cambridge. They're full-time winter taxable. I don't know where your voting rights records are. Address is in Cambridge and Boston. Oh, Bill Kuttner, I see you have a hand up. But you have to, there you go.
Okay. The historical record, I mean, look, but a lot of stuff is lost. So but it gets worse. I mentioned Patrice Tedesco's landscape history, which we have a copy in our office someplace, and in it they have a list of the confiscated parcels. Because when Hutchinson left, it was when he fled, the Shirley properties were confiscated, and it was like the Middle Age. There were like little plots of land around because, as you know, there wasn't a lot of money, so people used land. Like Abigail Adams kept buying land not because they wanted. That's the only place you could as a repository of value. So they would take these little parcels of land and they didn't work them all they would rent them from somebody. And so if you wanted to find out what was going on the land, you would have to find out who was renting that land and what the heck they were doing on it. And I have a 2-family house here, and I challenge anybody to go on any record and find out who was my tenant 20 years ago. I mean, so there are certain things which are just real, unless I wrote a letter saying, oh, what a great tenant I have, and you find that letter. So anyway, we're lucky. My last comment before I shut up here, I like Enoch Bartlett. How come there's no record? And I 20 years ago, I decided I was going to reenact Enoch Bartlett. I went online, nothing. So I had to sort of invent a character. And my leitmotif is, I'm interested in money, and that's sort of my theme, and it worked. And everything you said sort of lines up, so I don't have to go back and change my Enoch Bartlett talk based upon anything that you said. So thank you, I appreciate that.
No, that's
great presentation.
Thank you. We are at the new time hour, and so I don't want to. If we were at Shirley Place, we'd be having tea and coffee and things to eat right now. So I know people are getting ready to have lunch.
Eileen, can you shout out our April farm days to keep the theme going? And then
April Farm Day. What day is it? It's
April
you have to come to
20th.
Farm Day. It's so much fun.
And
What day is it, Susie?
Enoch Bartlett there. Bill will be in his Enoch Bartlett costume, and we'll have a petting zoo and a seed exchange and all kinds of fun gardening tips and crafts.
And what day is that, Susie?
April 20th, Saturday, April 20th. Rachel knows the time. I think it's 11 to 3.
It is 11 to 3.
And it was so much fun last year. It really was a blast.
And we just got our popcorn machine too.
Free popcorn.
The important things. We don't care about the animals, we care about the popcorn machine.
Many thank you to Franklin for our popcorn machine.
Yes.
Or lots of thanks to Franklin for our popcorn machine.
Thank you, everybody, and take care. Have a great day. It was a wonderful presentation. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Eileen.
Okay, thank you.
Have
Bye,
a great day, everyone.
Thanks,
You
Patty.
too, Pat.